My name is Jason Miller. I am the founder of The Finer Points online at learnthefinerpoints.com. I've been a CFI most of my adult life. I've been teaching flying full time for the last 20 years.
Jason, what's going on? Welcome back to the Pilot to Pilot podcast. It's been a while, man. We haven't talked in a minute.
I know, Justin. Thanks for inviting me on. It's really good to see you again. And always great to talk to you.
Always great to talk, man. Well, we are not doing a standard Pilot to Pilot podcast as I have done one with you way in the past. It's probably been like 4 years now. So maybe we need an update because obviously you're doing some great things with the Ground School app and you're just killing it on your own in general as a CFI. We were talking before about being pretty much a tech worker now. Like you are Steve Jobs of Ground School, essentially. So you got a lot going on, man. I don't know if that's a compliment or not. Some people like them, some people don't, but I meant that in a very good way.
No, I took it as a compliment, and you're right. You know, I've been teaching flying in the San Francisco Bay Area since 2002, and just about everybody that's gotten into my airplane, with a few exceptions, you know, during that time is either a founder in the tech industry, an investor in the tech industry, a C-level executive in the tech industry. It's what's done out there. So it's a very logical outgrowth of that to take the stuff that I knew and put it into a tech product.
I hope you've been trading stock options for these flight lessons and not taking any money, man.
I should have, man.
Well, mistakes have been made. If only Jason could go back in time when he was flying around Google executives, be like, hey, I don't want your money. I want stock options. That's all.
Yeah, it's so funny. I mean, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but that's one of the the coolest things about teaching for as long as I have is over the years, people that get into your airplane. You know, one time a guy got in and turned out he was the producer for Desperate Housewives. You remember that show?
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever saw that show. I never actually watched the show, but I was like, wow, here's a famous producer.
Yeah.
You know, so stuff like that happens a lot. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, hey, we are here to do a series. We talked about this off air a little bit, but we're going to bring a series together, get a nice fancy landing page for it, put it online, and it's essentially going to walk everyone through about how to become a pilot, how to be a successful pilot, how to be a good pilot, and take it in stages from student pilot, private pilot, instrument pilot, and commercial pilot. And maybe eventually we'll do some other stuff as well, because there's obviously other ratings that you need if you want to go make some money and do some stuff. You can't just get your commercial and be done, as I once thought. But we'll start with student pilot. There's a lot going on when you are a new student pilot. You know, a lot of these first decisions you make are pretty important, whether it's the flight school you go to, the CFI you go to, the type of airplanes you want to fly, the resources you want to kind of mold you into the pilot that you want to be. And I say it's important because the law of primacy, right? The first thing you learn, or the first instructor of how they teach you how to do stuff, that stuff sticks with you, whether you like it or not. When you're in an emergency, you're going to remember the first thing that you were taught. And it's very important that you make the right decision. And what makes it more difficult is you have no idea how to make the right decision. So we are going to help you, hopefully. Jason's been doing this for a while, so we'll kind of give some tips and tricks to how to navigate becoming a student pilot and what you need to do to set yourself up to be a very good private pilot. So Jason, yeah, if you have any, the first thing I was going to say is, what would you recommend for someone? You know, we probably all get these DMs, right? I want to be a pilot. What do I do now? What's kind of your go-to recommendation for that?
Well, you know, it's challenging for students, like you mentioned, for so many different reasons. I mean, not the least of which is it's challenging to even find a flight school. You know, if you're sitting in your house and you're thinking, okay, I want to be a pilot. It's like, where's the closest airport to me? You drive down there. There's a bunch of fences and warning signs, and you're like looking around. It feels like a bit like a gated community. You know what I mean? It's not for a lot of really smart reasons, it's not the most open environment, you know, when you go to an airport. So it's definitely challenging for students. And I think folks these days come in two different categories. And I think whoever's listening to this has to ask themselves this question, really. Is the goal to become a professional pilot? And some folks that are on that path are on a really fast track for practical reasons. You know, I can think of so many people that have reached out to me over the years, but one girl pops into my mind where she's working in business in Chicago and she only had enough money saved for like a year and a half. And she wanted to make like a career change from one career to flying. Right. So that's a that's a certain set of people, right? That know they want to be professional pilots, have a fixed amount of money and want to do it as fast as possible. And there's other folks that maybe aren't sure, but they're not under that time pressure, right? They get into the industry, they want to get their student pilot certificate, they're going to get their private pilot certificate and kind of see where the world takes them. You know, maybe they're a bit younger and on a longer path. That was me, by the way. I thought I wanted to be an airline pilot when I got into it, but I realized pretty early on that was not the direction I was going to go, and everything kind of slowed down a little bit. So the reason I say that is there are fast track paths people can go to, accelerated programs. There are some big programs around the United States where folks can go in and they say, okay, you're going to spend $80,000 and from this day to this day, and we're going to send you out a CFI. So, you know, we'll talk about that path. And then the other path is you have to go to the airport, find a flight school near you, hopefully find a experienced CFI that's living in a hangar somewhere out there at your small airport and, you know, get a mentor and just start going through the process of training. So those are, you know, it's important to sort of realize that distinction, I think. And it's also important, no matter which path you're on, I think, to try and experiment with different things. A lot of people think the first instructor they meet is the instructor they have to go with. The first school they walk into is the first school they have to go with. The first program they see is what they have to sign up for. But it's worth your while and worth your money to invest in a little intelligence on it. You know, go fly with one instructor, say, thank you very much. That was awesome. I'll call you in a couple weeks. Go fly with another instructor, maybe in a different airplane. And you could say, well, hey, that's $400 that I wasn't going to spend if I didn't do that. But at the same time, you're trying to figure out a good fit for your ultimate success. And that $400 or whatever you spent on that second flight is going to be totally worth it. And inside of all that, you have to figure out how is it, like you said, that you're going to set yourself up for success, that you're going to be a good student pilot. I mean, a good pilot. You're going to find a good instructor, and you don't know any better, right? You're brand new. You could meet the worst instructor in the world, and you're probably going to think that person's great. You can meet the best instructor in the world, and you're going to be sitting there going, I don't know. The guy next door might be better. You know, you have absolutely no idea. And so the idea that you're going to try different things, I think, is something that you should keep with you throughout all of flight training, really, but especially at the beginning. And don't feel bad about it. Like I said, I've been teaching for decades. And if my student said to me, hey, I want to go fly with Lisa next week because I want to see how she does stalls, I would say, awesome, go fly with Lisa. And if my student came back, by the way, and said, hey, Lisa does this thing that you don't do that was really, really amazing, I would go ask Lisa, what's this amazing thing you do? Right? Because it'll take my game up. So there shouldn't be any ego involved in this. And if you're a student pilot and you feel like you're going to offend your instructor, or your instructor's giving you a hard time for going and flying with somebody else, that would be a red flag for me, you know? So it's important. And the problem with the industry today is that everything is moving so fast. There are so many people that are going into that fast track, right? The ATP programs or whatever those accelerated programs are that they're doing. And even if they're not doing that, they're having a hard time finding instructors like me that have been teaching for 20 years because everybody's getting like sucked up into the airlines. And so with the industry moving that fast, I think it's really important that folks seek out quality sort of digital mentors if they can't find an actual physical mentor. And when I say mentor, I don't know exactly what I mean by that, but I know I mean somebody that didn't learn to fly 2 years ago. Right. Which is kind of what we see a lot of. My CFI got his CFI 2 years ago. He's teaching me, and then I'll teach somebody else, and then I'll teach somebody else. And it's all this very narrow junior experience that's getting handed down. So I was fortunate enough, for example, in my 20s to meet an old Air Force pilot, a guy in his 50s, had been flying like me for decades. And that's the kind of that's what I mean when I say mentor.
Yeah.
If you can find people with that experience. And if you can't, the good news is there are so many ways to access it these days. You know, we've got YouTube channels like Blanco Lirio, you know, with Juan Brown breaking down different accidents, and he's got tons of experience. He's an airline pilot. It's the entire reason we talked about Tech Company, but it's why we made the Ground School app. You know, our hope for the Ground School product is that it's like me in your pocket, no matter who you're flying with, right? Anywhere in the world, if you want to know what a 20-year veteran would say about it, just pull out the app. We've got all the flying lessons, everything in there. And on and on. There's so more. It's our product. There's YouTube channels. There's lots of ways for folks to kind of look around the room, so to speak, and say, like, am I learning the right things? Are my instructors bringing me the right things? Because you said it right in the intro there, the law of primacy. I mean, the more I teach, the more responsibility I feel for those early hours.
Yeah.
And nobody's perfect, and hindsight's 2020. But sometimes, the things that sort of keep me up, so to speak, they don't actually keep me up. But the things that bug me are, the lessons I gave early in my career when I was like, I wish I did that a little differently. I would do it differently today, but you can kind of bracket to perfection over time, and eventually that sort of goes.
Absolutely. Away. And I think one of the most important things that you can do as a student pilot is do an intro flight. And that's as easy as going to google.com saying intro flight. And that should populate the best flight school that spent the most on marketing to put their SEO right at the top. And when I said it right like that is because if you take an intro flight with them, that doesn't mean you need to use that flight school for your introductory flight lessons or for your flight lessons in general. That's just to see, hey, do I actually like it? Do I get sick when I go fly? Do I enjoy taking off? Does a small plane scare the crap out of me? If you are afraid and you're in the plane, maybe we shouldn't drop, $1,000 on a headset or get the whatever the nicest iPad with Garmin Pilot and the ground school app and all that stuff. Maybe you should hold off on that. Take the intro flight and see if you like it. Some people don't like it and are like, all right, screw this. I'm going out. I'm going to be a firefighter. I've seen that happen before. Exactly.
Yeah.
Became a firefighter. And then another important thing is to get your medical. I always recommend you go for your first class for the first one. Some people might not agree with that, but if this is a career that you want to do, you want to know pretty early on if you have anything that's going to inhibit you from doing this career. Because like we said, it's expensive. You mentioned $80,000 for one of the big schools. That's probably even a low number, to be honest with you, what you actually are going to spend on that. So make sure you're spending probably more money than you'd want to at the beginning to make sure you like it, to make sure you find the right flight school. As you mentioned, repeating flight lessons with different instructors, maybe that's an option. And when you go to mentor professional pilots of tomorrow, I don't know what they offer for new pilots or student pilots, but it's a great mentorship. It's a great mentorship program, and it's definitely worth reaching out. They might be able to pair you with someone that just became an airline pilot, has recently gone to a certain school, or a pilot in that area. So those are all great options for you to check out.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I'm a big believer in investing in yourself early. Some people aren't in that position. Like, the girl that I mentioned from Chicago had to go through the accelerated program. And what I say to folks like that is if you have to go fast in the beginning, just know that you're going to want to come back and fill holes later. If you can invest in yourself in the beginning, know that it's going to pay dividends for you later on, so if, just taking the time to get the skills and to really make sure that you're cementing all those foundational, skills that you mentioned that we want to be part of our primacy and not rushing through the beginning of training. I mean, all of this is really important.
And as someone who has kind of this experience as an instructor that has come up in you did your training Part 61, right?
Yeah.
Has seen kind of the industry grow with the Part 141, Part 61 schools, fast track versus not fast track. It's obviously very personal. And it's obviously very tailored to what you want out of it. Do you want to get it done in 8 months, hold on to the fire hose and really just get your ratings? If that's all you want to do, then maybe ATP, those kind of schools are good for you. But as for you, and specifically, can't say that word sometimes, but specifically,
There it is.
what do you recommend for the average student? That's got to be someone that's sitting there right now that could be watching this, just like, man, it would be great to get it done. But from someone that's seen a lot of these pilots come up in these pilot farms, as some people call them, and I don't mean that negatively, it's just some people call it that. What do you recommend for someone that's kind of just in between right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, let me just say this about the pilot farms, just in case someone's hearing drink from the fire hose and accelerated training. If they're hearing that as a more rigorous program, that's not exactly what it is. Folks that go down that path, I think, tend to become airline pilots. And that's where they're going. That's what they want to be. And in my experience, most of them don't ever fly light airplanes again. right? That's it. They get into the cockpit of a heavy jet. They've got their job, they've got their pension, they go home to their family. Most of them aren't out at the hangar building an RV on the weekends, right? That's not the way it typically goes. Some of them are, like I mentioned, Juan Brown, for example, he flies a 777, he flies a Husky, he flies a 310. And he's the kind of guy when I see him at the airport where he's like, oh, darn it, I have to go fly the 777. I'll be back in a few days. Like it's like a break in his life, right?
Yeah.
And so you kind of should understand that it's not a path of one is more vigorous and rigorous and harder than the other. It's just kind of two different roads. Mm-hmm. And the road of investing in yourself or being that sort of in-between person, like when I say it pays dividends later, I mean, it provides for all opportunities. Like you could become an airline pilot, but you could also fly for the Department of Agriculture. You could fly a float plane for, the guys over in Sausalito. You could fly for Pac Valley Amflight. Like there's a million things you could do that are sort of in between jobs, so to speak. And I think that realization for me was a bit surprising. Like when I got into aviation, like everybody else, I wanted to be an airline pilot. I was enrolled at Embry-Riddle and I thought, well, I'll get my private and this fall I'm going to Embry-Riddle and I'm going to fly an airliner. And one of my early jobs in aviation, probably one of the most important jobs I ever had in aviation, was driving a fuel truck. Working at an FBO was like the first thing I did, just go get a job driving a fuel truck. And doing that, I got to give so many pilots rides to lunch or rides to the hotel or whatever. And I'm talking to so many different pilots, NetJets pilots, former airline pilots, charter pilots, private pilots, business owners, everybody. And you start to get a sense that, wow, I really thought you're either an airline pilot or you're not a pro pilot before I got into this, right? But the reality is there's a million different jobs in between. There are tons and tons of flying jobs that people might not know about.
Absolutely.
So for those in between people, if you're not on that fast track and knowing exactly what you're doing and have a fixed amount of time and a fixed amount of money, invest in yourself early. And keep your sort of antenna up there and stay open to all the jobs that are possible. Yeah. But if in the Part 61 world, I was very fortunate. Like I said, I met a mentor, former Air Force guy. And part of the challenge for the people that are not in those accelerated programs and that are working in the Part 61 environment right now is finding high quality flight training and feeling confident that that's exactly what they're getting.
Yeah.
It's a real challenge. It's a real, so one of the things that we've done at the Finer Points to try to help raise the bar there a little bit, is our CFI club. So we have a free CFI club that does monthly meetings. And in those meetings, we bring in like designated pilot examiners, other people like boards of directors from NAFI. And we have conversations about NAFI, by the way, is the National Association of Flight Instructors. But we have conversations about how to raise the game, how to deal with problems with students, what are the changes in the regulations. And more than what we talk about, what I notice is everybody that shows up there, we have, like I said, 1,600 instructors around the country, but everybody that shows up at those meetings is there to become a better flight instructor. And so we're working on ways to get those folks depicted on a map so that anybody that's interested could know where these instructors are. All of those instructors are using our app freely. They have free access to it so that they can learn the kind of tips and tricks that I'm teaching or how I work through problems with students, and they can work with their students in that same way. So, we're trying to create a network of instructors that are, striving to be excellent, I guess, and then make that obvious and visible to people.
Absolutely. And I think it's important because, like you said, 61, even 141, there's a lot of instructors that are 1,450 hours. And if you get on with them at 1,450, they're going to be out at 1,500. And you can't fault them for that. That's how the system is set up. You get 1,500 hours, 1,200, whatever it is, the mins that you need, and you go to an airline. It's just how it's set up. And unfortunately, some instructors kind of handle that handoff a little bit differently. Some are just out immediately. Some finish up the students. Some pass them off to an instructor that they trust. So you don't know what scenario or what situation you're going to fall in. And that's really hard to predict too. It just kind of how it all plays out. If an airline's like, hey, we got class tomorrow, you're gonna come, they're gonna be like, all right, I'm out.
Yeah.
um,
I mean, yeah, it's an interesting ethical question, I think, for
yeah,
CFIs. And
right.
I had like early in my career, all my colleagues, they're all airline pilots today. So, everybody that I went through flight training with was on that path. And one of them said to me one day, he goes, we're like having a beer after work or something. And he said, man, he's like, I'm having a hard time. I can't see my students as anything more than money right now. Like he was basically just like looking at the hours in the day, like how much money am I making or whatever. We got into a long conversation, and after talking to this guy for a long time, I think I helped him realize that just because he needed the money and just because he needed the hours wasn't mutually exclusive to the idea that he could be an excellent flight instructor,
Right.
and that there's an ethical way to do that. I think if you're a doctor and you're guiding somebody through cancer treatment, just because they're going to give you a fellowship over at Harvard and they need you to come to the meeting right now, you're not going to be like, you know what, I know we had surgery scheduled in 20 minutes,
Yeah.
but this guy's Fred, he's really good, I gotta go. Like there's an ethical obligation to see that through. And it doesn't mean you can't get the job or take the job. There's so many jobs right now. If
Yeah.
it's not that class, it'll be a class in a month. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to finish all your students, but do them better than, ghosting
Just
them.
leaving. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, this
I
is
don't
their
think that
primacy. Like you said, this is their
yeah.
life, right?
I don't want to scare anyone. I don't think that happens all the time. That's going to be like a one-off situation. You'll hear about a worst case scenario, but I don't really think a lot of instructors are out there ghosting you, but it is the possibility that it can happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's shocking. Some of the stuff I hear, Justin, to be honest. And, it's why I feel really passionate about working against it.
Yeah.
I think that the speed of hiring creates kind of a dangerous cycle, like we were saying, where you have one instructor
Oh, for
teaching
sure.
something they learned a year ago.
Yeah.
And, I hear stories that are quite shocking. I met a kid who came out here to fly with me and he said, I'm about ready to solo. I just want a second opinion. And, the kid had never started an airplane. His instructor started it every time for him. He had never left the traffic
Wow.
pattern in 30 hours. His instructor only flew with
That's a
him in the
red
traffic pattern. Yeah.
flag.
Never used the radio. His instructor was on the radio. So here's a guy 30 hours says he's ready to solo. And I just told him to start the airplane. He said, I've never done that. Like, shocking things. And how does that happen? How do you have an instructor out there in the world? And this guy, wouldn't give me his name because I was ready to turn him in. I thought that was
Yeah,
gross negligence, honestly. But
absolutely. Yeah, that's bad.
yeah. So how do you know if you're a student? How did this kid know? I mean, fortunately he was smart enough to have found me somewhere. I think he got
Yeah.
turned on to a podcast. Maybe he got a glimmer, like this guy's saying things my instructor doesn't say. And then he came out for an assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Um, I think the important part with how do you know is to get involved in the community, right? Like if you are just going to do flight instructing and that's it, bad reputations spread very fast in aviation. Good reputations spread equally as fast. If you are hanging out at the FBO, if you're involved with forums or just anything that is aviation in general, maybe even getting a job, just talking to people, be like, hey, this is my flight instructor, this is his name. They'll be like, well, isn't that the guy or the girl that doesn't let anyone start an engine? It's like, whoa, well, you need to find someone, just being involved
yeah, 100%.
can really help out a lot. And sometimes different personalities mesh, so you got to take all the advice you get with a grain of salt. If one person has a bad experience, it could be a one-off, but when you start hearing multiple people coming up being like, that was bad, I needed a new instructor, I had to call Jason, I had to spend some extra time in his app, like all that kind of stuff, I think you
Yeah.
need to probably find somewhere else to go.
Yeah, 100%. Like what you just said is so valuable. I always tell it's like when people come and work for me, I always say that aviation is like being stuck at a dinner party with the same 15 people forever. You know what I mean? So like, be really careful, like what you say and who, cause like you said, everything spreads like wildfire. It's a pretty small community. And if folks didn't know it, most airports, to like what you said about joining those communities, a lot of airports have pilot group meetings once a month or have EAA chapters where you can become a member of the Experimental Association, Aircraft Association, even if you aren't building and it's just a community of pilots. Lots of different ways to get involved with the community, but you're 100% right. If I can get 2 good references on a pilot, that's about all I need. That's how small,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? That's about how small the industry is.
Yeah. And what's crazy is you were mentioning before about how it can feel kind of closed off at the beginning when you're coming into to aviation. Like it feels like there's big fences up. It feels like it's almost an impossible industry to break into. It's incredibly easy to get into this industry, to start flying. You
Mm-hmm.
just have to make the effort, right? Like you
100%.
just have to walk into the door. Once you go into the door and be like, hey, I really like airplanes, you're going to have Dave, who has 8,000 hours and a 747, drinking that crappy coffee, being like, "Hey, boy, let's go fly,"
Oh,
or, "Hey, dude,
100%.
yeah." So you just got to make that effort, and once you make that effort, you are going to have a community that will welcome you, and well, hopefully they will. But you're going to have a community that will bring you in. They
Yeah.
will talk aviation. They'll tell you who you should fly with, what airplanes they flew, how they got their hours. That's how I found out about skipping to become a CFI. No offense to being a CFI, just wasn't. But I was just flying around and realized I was in my CFI training, and someone was like, "Hey, Midwest Aero Photography is hiring." And I was like, "Sweet, I don't have to be a CFI. Do you have a recommendation?" Or it's like, "Yeah, I can recommend you. Here's the chief pilot's phone number. Give him a call." Called him. I had 300 hours, got hired. I've started flying like a month later.
I love it.
Now, yeah. Now, was it the best decision I ever made? Probably not, but it worked out. You know, I had an engine failure in a 206, had a bunch of maintenance issues there, learned a lot. But unfortunately, as you'll learn when you're moving into this career, building your time can be dangerous. Building your time, flying airplanes is dangerous. Making the right decisions and learning how to say no can be very difficult and one of the
Mm-hmm.
best things you can ever learn. So don't ever push yourself too far. This is kind of getting farther into a different series when we move on from private pilot, instrument, commercial. But it's important to learn how to say no pretty early in your career and always trust yourself, trust your gut. If you have a good CFI, they'll question you why you feel uncomfortable. And if they feel comfortable of it, maybe it's good to go up with them and they can show you, hey, it's bumpy, but it's safe. Hey, it's raining, but it's safe. Hey, the clouds are relatively low, but it's still safe, or it's windy, but it's safe. And you can push yourself that way.
Yeah, yeah, that's 100% accurate.
Yeah,
And that's what it was about that fuel truck job that was so amazing
yeah,
for me early on, is just
absolutely.
it's what you said. It's all the different pilots you meet, the people you meet, sitting in the fuel truck, listening to the radio when nothing's happening. You're just listening to the tower. You're doing runway inspections for the tower.
Yep.
There's a kid out at our local airport now just working on his CFI, and what he did was airplane detailing. So he's been around
There
the
you go.
airport. He created his own little business card, and he does an amazing job. I mean, I don't pay him enough. Like, I think I bring him in like once every 2 months or something like that. And for what he charges, he
That's some
sits out
hard
there
work.
for 8 hours degreasing the belly of the
Yeah,
plane. I mean, it looks like, it shines in the hangar. I mean, that's the
that is some
reputation
hard
he's
work.
got. So
Yeah,
everybody
yep,
around is like, when they think about, hey, you need a co-pilot, or hey, I think Zach's building time. I think he's working
yeah,
on his commercial. You should get him up with you, and this kid's flying to
yep,
Utah. He's flying all over. That's how it's
yeah.
done. It's
I think,
networking.
like you said, volunteering your time, doing the hard jobs, showing that you have good work ethic, and just being there. I
Yeah.
think just being there and being a name that pops up in someone's head, however you make that happen. Now there is
100%.
a fine line that you can push. You can either be the really annoying person, or like there's a very fine line for how you play that. But being there and being a good person is just huge in the industry, especially early on, because you make your reputation right away,
Yeah,
and
100%.
it's hard to
And
recreate.
if you show up in the way that you just described, if a person, if one were to show up
Yeah,
and show that they can work hard and demonstrate that they're present, and even say something like, hey, if you guys ever know anybody that's flying, like, I'm looking to build time, just
yeah,
throw something like that out there.
yep,
Pilots just want to help. It's funny. I go to the to Auburn Airport and Nevada County and the Bay Area. Like, I'm kind of all over, but Auburn in particular has no fences. I don't know if I've ever told you that, but it's like,
no, you didn't.
it's one of the only airports. I always feel bad talking about it because I'm afraid I'm going to get him in trouble. But, like, we talked about all those, like, do not enter, lethal force will be used, right? Like, government trespassing. There's all these signs and barbed wire around most airports. That's not the way it is at Auburn. Like, the road drives right up to the ramp. And if you're an
Oh, wow.
unsuspecting, citizen of the town, you could literally drive right onto the runway. There's just no perimeter fence. And what it does for the community is shocking. Like, so because that's what's true, you always have moms with strollers in the
Yeah,
middle of the day. You've got dads with kids on a Friday, and none of these people are pilots. They just come to the airport to eat at the cafe and watch the planes. They take advantage of it like the way you would hope a community would. And
absolutely.
every time I see a mom and a kid if I have so much as 10 minutes, I kind of like open the door of my plane and I'm thinking, I wonder if she's going to ask me if he wants to see inside, you know, or if he comes
Please
close, I'm
come
like,
on.
hey, does he want to see inside or does she want to see inside? It's like pilots just have this desire to help and share. And, you know,
100% agree.
yeah.
And it's important to remember that when you make it in your career, to remember how helpful that was. And now it's your part to give back and have that
Yeah.
opportunity. And that could be as an airline pilot, you see a kid smile when he sees a cockpit, like, hey, buddy, come on up. Let's go look at the cockpit. It's just as easy as that. That's all you got to do.
That's it.
I know we're kind of running short on time. I don't want you to be late for your French appointment. So I want to bring up kind of more of an important part for what a student pilot can do.
Okay.
As an instructor, as someone who makes this their career, you have seen a lot of people come to you to have flight lessons. What sets apart someone that is going to be a good student or a bad student and something they can do from the beginning before they ever touch an airplane?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me that. Most folks are really in their own way. And I think as a CFI, it becomes clear to you pretty quickly how to like the extent to which people are in their own way. And I'll give you an example of student A and student B. Let me think of a good example here.
I'm gonna drink some water right
all right. So let's imagine you're on final approach and you've got there's an aiming point and we're working on landings. And the student comes in and pulls way too hard and the airplane sort of balloons. And then to react to the balloon, they push forward and the nose comes down. Okay. And then now we're in this situation where I have to take over the airplane. Mm-hmm. I might say something in that situation to help fix it the next time around. Like I might say, look, it's okay to balloon, but all you have to do to stop it from going back up is release the back pressure. Don't push forward. If you push forward, you're going to go back to the runway. Okay. So that's my feedback is don't push forward, just release it a little bit. Right. So that's what I would say. A person not in their own way would say, okay. A person in their own way would say, yeah, man, but there was like, Gus, did you see, like, I was totally stable on final. Like I was on final. I had that aiming point. And then the wind came off the right and gusted. And it's like, all of a sudden we're not talking anymore about the thing that I said because the criticism that I gave was, enough of a challenge to the ego that there was all this response about what was done well. And it's like, that's what I mean. So students that are completely not in their own way are such a joy to work with. In fact, my business partner, the guy that writes my technical co-founder that writes all the code for the app was probably the one student I had who was least in his own way. Right. It was like, he got through
most of the way.
Well, he was out of his own way. He was not like, he finished my instrument program, which is a pretty hard program in like 3.5 or 4 months. Oh, wow. And pretty much every single thing I told him, if I said, hold your checklist up, he would just say, okay. And the next time he came, he would hold it up. If I said, I want you to finish your approach briefing with how low, how long, and which way, he wouldn't argue about why it was better to do the briefing strip first, or wouldn't it be better if I got the channel for, he would just say, okay. And it would come back and it would be fixed the way I wanted it to be fixed. And it's not an ego challenge. If I'm trying to do my job, which is take 20 years of experience and give you these little incremental improvements, the last thing I want you to do is argue with me about why or talk about what you did great. And if you disagree with me, that's fine. Like that's learning, right? You could say that, say, hey, let's talk about this because I think it'd be better if we did it a different way, maybe after the lesson or something like that, or before the lesson in the briefing. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is in the airplane, I'm giving pointers, and for whatever reason, people are defending against taking that information in. So I think if you're a student pilot going into training, the two biggest pieces of advice that I could give you is really try to get out of your own way. Really try to understand to just take what's coming from the instructor. And sometimes it's not fun. Like my mentor, Richard, was a real dick. Like I fired that guy 3 times, right? So sometimes, so he would just sit there and pound on me. He would give me that feedback that I was talking about, but he would do it in an insulting way. And I would just have to take it, and I did, thankfully. But the other thing is to put in the time in between lessons. Like it's not bowling. It's not riding. You're not going to show up and just do it when you get there. Like the reason my partner, Todd, was so successful with me in my instrument rating was for 2 reasons. One is he was not in his own way. He was hearing what I was saying and just saying, okay. But then he was taking the time in between the lessons to practice the thing that I told him. If it was hold the checklist up, he didn't just wait till the next time he saw me to sort of think about that. He did some chair flying and he worked it through. He fixed the problem for real on his own, so that when he came back to me, I said, yep, check that problem's fixed. But wait, I noticed another one, don't do this thing. And he would say, okay. And then we came back the next time, that would be fixed too. And in that way, it was extremely effective and efficient, and 3.5 months.
There you go. That's very impressive. And as someone who has created this app that is a resource, what would you, let's just say they listen to this, they download the app, they signed up for it, they're all in, they're a student pilot, they're getting ready to, their first flight's in a week. Would you recommend they go through lessons? Would you recommend they read anything? Like, what would you recommend for them to do with that app to prepare themselves for their first flight?
Everybody's a little bit different, so it's hard to come up with a, do this, because it's not going to fit everybody. But the thing that I would say is there's this concept in flying of the saturation point. Like the image, we often talk about it with instrument flying, but the image we use is like a juggler, and if somebody's good at juggling, they can juggle 3 balls. And if they're really good, maybe 4, maybe even 5. But when you throw them a 6th ball or whatever ball they can't juggle and they go for it, they lose the whole thing, right? All the balls fall. It's not like they just missed that 6th ball. And so I would say if you're not saturated, then absolutely the app is there for you to go through. There's, of course, the ground knowledge and the written test prep, but the flight side, the flying side, what we're trying to do is give you that primacy that you, even if you're not finding it from other people, right? Like we've got the standard operating procedures and the basic communications, and then how to do a pre-flight inspection and how to start the airplane and how to taxi the airplane. And to the extent that you can get ahead on all that stuff, beautiful, if it doesn't make you feel saturated. And what I would recommend is having a notebook that you're writing down questions you don't understand. Like I watched the starting video, but I don't understand why we can't hold the key on start. Like what's the problem with that? Whatever the thing is, right? You write down the question so that when you go to your CFI, hopefully you tell that CFI, hey, I've been using this app. You get it for free, by the way, because you're a CFI. Just, go to learnthefinerpoints.com. And anyway, I wrote down a bunch of questions for you. Here's some stuff I brought in. What do you think of this?
Yeah.
And other people, if that feels like over your head, or you want to be a little bit more methodical, maybe you don't have that much time or whatever it is. I would say work with it until you hit that saturation point or feel like you're getting in way over your head. And it is built in such a way that if you're a person that wants to go through the whole thing, you can go through the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, cool. So to recap a little bit, we have use Google, find out where the flight schools are, get a mentor, whether that's just a buddy, that's in aviation, or just go to the flight school and start talking to people, create friendships. Professional Pilots of Tomorrow is a great resource, which you talked about.
Yeah, awesome.
Invest in yourself, whether that's resources like the Ground School app or whatever you do to make you feel comfortable. If that's having the nicest headset or the best, whatever you need to do to feel more comfortable in the airplane, go ahead and do it. And don't be afraid to shop around. Look at the flight school, see what you want, change flight instructors if you need to, and try to get your medical pretty early on. Obviously, you need it to go fly, but before you invest in any of that stuff, get your medical, especially see if you can get a first class if you want to be an airline pilot, because your career is not going to go very far if you can't get a first class medical. So those are... phones ringing. So those are pretty much the main steps. Did I forget anything? Do you remember anything that we talked about that I didn't say?
No, but I think that's good advice about the medical, even if you're not going to be a pro pilot, getting a first class medical, because if you're unable to get a first class medical, I don't know, it might be a sign of, I don't know, some condition. And it always sucks to put all this money into it and find out later that you can't fly.
For sure.
Yeah.
And there's still avenues for you to fly if you can't get a first class medical. Just as a profession, it might not be for you. So it's definitely important to figure that early on. But hey, Jason, you have a French lesson that you need to start going to. So our next podcast is going to be only in French. I'll use ChatGPT to translate everything I say, and good luck to anyone.
All right.
There are some French words all over the place in aviation, so it'll be very useful.
Yeah. Pitot tube.
All right, man.
All right, Justin, nice to chat with you. Thanks again.